In my fourth talk on mystical theology, I would like to look at St. Gregory of Nyssa. And we might give as title of this talk, Dazzling Darkness. I mentioned earlier how we may use two different symbols for the encounter between the human person and the living God. The symbol of light and the symbol of darkness. Now, the people whom we've been looking at in the last two talks, Evagrius and Macarius, are both solar mystics. They think of God in terms of light. But St. Gregory of Nyssa, and this is his great innovation, brings back into the mainstream of Christian mystical theology the idea of divine darkness. Already, as I've mentioned, the Jewish writer Philo draws on Exodus 20:21 on the phrase, Moses entered into the deep darkness where God was. And he treats darkness as a symbol of the divine incomprehensibility, the unfathomable mystery of God. Clement continues this. In the late 2nd and early 3rd century. But then, for a time, the symbol of divine darkness is not found in the leading mystical authors and writers on the spiritual life. Origen, Gregory of Nazianzus, along with Evagrius and Macarius, are all of them light mystics. But Gregory of Nyssa brings back the divine darkness and sets it in the center of his spiritual teaching. Clearly, the symbol of darkness can be used in different ways. First of all, darkness can be seen as a negative symbol. We speak of the darkness of sin, the darkness of ignorance. Clearly, in this pejorative sense, darkness is not applicable to God. And doubtless it is in this sense that St. John says God is light and in him is no darkness at all. Then, at a second level, darkness can be seen as a symbol of purging and purification. This is the way in which the darkness symbol is used, for example, in the Western Carmelite author St. John of the Cross. He speaks of the darkness of the senses and of the spirit, the dark night of the soul. And this signifies for John of the Cross the purging, the purification that we have to undergo in order to approach God. Exactly, the dark night in John of the Cross represents the laying aside of images of which Evagrius speaks. But then there is a third sense in which the symbol of darkness may be employed, where it signifies not just purging and purification, but union. And John of the Cross also uses darkness in this sense, not just as purification, but as a symbol of our meeting with God, our union with him in love. So here we have the highest level of the darkness symbolism, where it represents not our sinfulness, not our need to be purified, but the mystery of God himself. And it is in this third sense that Gregory chiefly uses the symbol of darkness. First of all, a few words about the life of St. Gregory of Nyssa. Let us once again make the personal connection. He was born around 335, and he died soon after 394. He was the younger brother of Basil the Great. In fact, there were a number of others in the family, but we need not speak of them now. Basil, early in his life, soon after his university studies, firmly adopts the monastic path. But his younger brother Gregory followed a different way. Initially he embarked on a secular career, becoming a rhetor, a rhetorician, which means he probably taught rhetoric, how to make effective speeches. But it probably also means that he had a legal training and would have pleaded in court. At any rate, he is following a civil career initially. And he married. Most of the fathers were not married, they were monastics. So it's rather precious to find a father who was a married man. The name of St. Gregory's wife, as far as we can discover, was Saint Theosaphia. Basil, his elder brother, when he became Archbishop of Caesarea, the chief city in Cappadocia, was deeply involved in the struggle against Arianism, against the heresy which made Christ less than God, which regarded him as a created being. And in order to gain support in his struggle against Arianism, Basil insists to his younger brother Gregory that he should be ordained bishop. He also has his friend Gregory of Nazianzus consecrated as bishop. Neither of them seem to have been particularly enthusiastic about this, but Basil was a person of strong character, and he got his way. Gregory, from that point on, seems to have lived with his wife as brother and sister. She became a deaconess, but she continued to look after him. They didn't actually have any children. After Basil's death in 379, it is his younger brother Gregory who assumes leadership in the struggle against the Arians, because after 381, Gregory of Nazianzus also entered into retirement. And so Gregory, who at the beginning of his life was not particularly an ecclesiastical figure, ends up by being very much at the heart of the church struggle in favor of the truth. In his later years, Gregory writes two works that are of particular significance: a mystical commentary on the Song of Songs, which he interprets as a story of the human soul in union with Christ the bridegroom. And then a symbolical interpretation of the life of Moses. And he sees Moses in his life as being a paradigm, an example of the human person in quest of union with God. And it's chiefly on his life of Moses that I shall be drawing today. People usually think of the Christian life as a journey from darkness into light. Gregory would agree with that, so far as the early stages of the spiritual way are concerned. But then, in a paradoxical fashion, he suggests that the later stages of the Christian life are a journey from light into darkness. Gregory doesn't follow the three stages that we find in Origen and Evagrius: the active life, natural contemplation, contemplation of God. Gregory has three rather different stages based on the life of Moses. The first stage in Moses' life is his encounter with God in the burning bush. This is a vision of God in light, the first theophany that Moses experiences. But then there is a further stage, a second level. As the people of Israel leave the land of Egypt, they are accompanied by a cloud of mingled light and darkness. And this is then the second stage for the Christian. From light into a combination of light and darkness. And after this there comes the third and crucial stage, which is Mount Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain. He enters into the deep darkness where God is. So here are Gregory's three stages, very different from those that we found in Evagrius. From illumination into partial darkness, and from partial darkness into total darkness. Not from darkness to light, but from light to darkness. A striking reversal of symbolism. Let us listen to the way Gregory speaks about the divine darkness. This is central passage in the life of Moses. What does it mean that Moses entered the darkness and then saw God in it? What is now recounted seems somehow to be contradictory to the first theophany. For then the divine was beheld in light, but now he is seen in darkness. Here Gregory is referring to the vision that Moses has of the burning bush. Let us not think that this is at variance with the sequence of things we have contemplated spiritually. Scripture teaches by this that religious knowledge comes at first to those who receive it as light. Therefore, what is perceived to be contrary to religion is darkness. And escape from darkness comes about when one participates in light. So that's the first stage, where you move from the darkness of ignorance and sin into light. But as the intellect progresses, and through an ever greater and more perfect diligence comes to apprehend reality. As it approaches more nearly to contemplation, it sees more clearly that God cannot be contemplated. For leaving behind everything that is observed, not only what sense comprehends, but also what the intelligence thinks it sees, it keeps on penetrating deeper, until by the intelligence's yearning for understanding, it gains access to the invisible and the incomprehensible, and there it sees God. This is the true knowledge of what is sought. This is the seeing that consists in not seeing, because that which is sought transcends all knowledge, being separated on all sides by incomprehensibility as by a kind of darkness. Therefore John the Sublime, who penetrated into the luminous darkness, says, "No one has ever seen God," thus asserting that knowledge of the divine essence is unattainable, not only by humans, but also by every intelligent creature. That would be by the angels as well. When therefore Moses grew in knowledge, he declared that he had seen God in the darkness. That is, that he had then come to know that what is divine is beyond all knowledge and apprehension. For the text says, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. Here then we see very clearly that the darkness of Sinai signifies the incomprehensibility of God. Alike in this life and in the age to come, we shall never apprehend the inner essence of God. We shall never understand God in the way that he understands himself. Even though we enjoy true knowledge of God, it is never exhaustive knowledge. Even though we enjoy true union with God in love, love still is enshrouded in mystery. So the darkness signifies the divine incomprehensibility. But we notice how Gregory speaks of this darkness as luminous. It is a dazzling darkness. It is a darkness full of light. God is not darkness in himself, in the sense that there is anything lacking in God. God is darkness not in a negative but in a positive sense. He is darkness because he is a luminousness so far beyond our apprehension that we experience him as darkness. So the darkness for Gregory signifies not an absence but a presence, not a lack but a fullness. The darkness does not simply signify that God is beyond understanding. The darkness is also a symbol of union. Moses is united with God in the darkness. So in this way, the darkness is luminous, radiant, dazzling. A coincidence of opposites. And Gregory pursues this theme of the coincidence of opposites as he proceeds. We have seen how he says, this is the seeing that consists in not seeing. For Gregory, the true vision of God is non-vision. The true understanding of God is non-understanding. The true knowledge of God is utter ignorance. So there is here a coincidence of opposites in Gregory's approach to the vision of God. Gregory therefore stands out as the supreme witness to God as mystery, to the otherness of the divine. And yet, this is not the whole story. If we balance this passage in the life of Moses with his commentary on the Song of Songs, in the Song of Songs there is a union with God in love. So in the Song of Songs he emphasizes the nearness of God. So God is mystery beyond our understanding, and yet we enjoy union in love with this God of mystery. This is the supreme coincidence of opposites in Gregory. Otherness, yet nearness. Gregory goes on to give a symbolic interpretation of the 10 Commandments that were delivered to Moses on Sinai. And he particularly stresses the commandment to Moses not to make any graven image of God. And he applies this in a noetic as well as a physical sense. The commandment delivered to Moses does not simply refer to idols of stone or wood. It refers also to our mental concepts which can come between us and God. We form notions of God which, unless we are careful, can become idols. We rest in our picture of God, whether a visual picture or an intellectual picture. But the living God is far greater than this. And so, says Gregory of Nyssa, we have to smash the idols, our mental idols. We have to say to ourselves, your God is too small. We want to reduce God to something that we can easily grasp. God made us in his image, and so we tend to return the compliment, and we make God in our image. But that is not acceptable. God is not to be restricted to our terms of understanding. As C.S. Lewis says in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Aslan is not a tame lion. And so Aslan, the wild lion, smashes our images because our pictures of God are not worthy of him. So that is the way in which Gregory understands the commandment, no graven images, no intellectual concepts coming between us and God. That, however, is not the end of Moses' journey. There is a fourth theophany that comes in Exodus chapter 33. Moses says to God, "Show me your glory." And God replies, "You cannot see my glory and live." But then God says to Moses, all right, I shall put you in a cranny, a crevice of the rock. And as I pass by, I will cover the crevice with my hand. I shall pass by in my glory, but you will not be able to look at it, because it is too much for you. And so God passes by Moses in his glory and covers the crevice with his hand. However, God, as he withdraws, takes away his hand, and Moses promptly peeps out, and he sees the back parts of God, though he does not see God's face. Well, what does Gregory make of that rather unpromising incident, which to us might seem not to offer any very clear understanding of the spiritual life? Gregory says, if you see somebody's back, this means that you are following them. And if you keep following them but never catch up and never actually see their face, this means that you continue to follow them. And this applies, he says, to our relationship with God endlessly to all eternity. Gregory defines perfection as being the fact that we never actually become perfect. He thinks in terms of perpetual progress. And this progress, he says, will go on right into the age to come. We shall never attain the point where we have caught up with God and see his face. We shall never attain the point when we say, now I know everything. Even in the age to come, discipleship will continue forever. And we shall go on progressing further and further. The very essence of perfection, then, is that we never become perfect. We reach the end of the quest by never reaching it. The journey is itself its own fulfillment. The unending desire for God is the satisfaction of that desire. So this is a further paradox in Gregory, a further coincidence of opposites. Not only does he say that vision means non-vision, that knowledge means unknowing, that darkness means luminosity, but in this fourth and final theophany, he is saying to seek God endlessly is to find him. Never to attain perfection is to become perfect. To be ever in movement is to have reached utter stability. Quite an unexpected way of interpreting this strange incident. Rowan Williams, Archbishop of Canterbury, in his book The Wound of Knowledge, uses the phrase, end without end. That's a very good phrase to sum up Gregory's final paradox. As J.R.R. Tolkien says, in The Hobbit, roads go ever, ever on. Gregory was not the first Christian writer to emphasize this idea of perpetual progress. We find it already in Irenaeus, writing at the end of the 2nd century. Even in the age to come, says Irenaeus, God will always have new things to teach us, and we shall have new things to learn. In other words, even in heaven, we shall never be able to say to God, "You are repeating yourself. We have heard it all before." God will go on being continually a God of surprises, well known yet unknown, revealed yet still mystery, united with us but ever beyond and above us. When I was a child, I was given a book about Felix the cat, and Felix the cat was given a special pair of boots, magic boots, which enabled him to keep walking. I remember the refrain in the book, "Felix, he kept walking on." So Felix the cat is a good motto if we want to understand Gregory of Nyssa. Felix keeps on walking in his magic boots into all eternity. And he never stops walking, yet he has already arrived. That is Gregory's great paradox. The underlying presupposition here, which applies to all Gregory's theology, is precisely the infinity of God. Now, what Gregory is doing here is to effect, in relation with Greek philosophical thought, and especially Platonism, something that is nothing less than a Copernican revolution. The pyramid has been indeed turned on its head. The perspective has indeed been reversed. The Platonist view is that all change and movement indicates imperfection. Perfection is something static. The good is immutable. Changeability indicates imperfection and even evil. Gregory's answer is, the Platonist view is certainly correct if we have in mind only our fallen experience of movement and time. But there is a higher level of time and movement to which the Platonist strictures do not apply. Time can be redeemed and transfigured. Time can lead into eternity. Gregory mentions forms of change which involve cyclic repetition without any progress, such as trying to fill a sieve with sand. The more we pour the sand in, the more it runs out from the bottom, and so we never get anywhere. Their change is futile. But there is another form of change which is not repetitive, which is constantly creative, which is ever new, a desire which is its own fulfillment. And it is this kind of change that applies to the age to come. not the futile tasks that we have to do every day, like brushing our teeth. Well, that's not so futile, because if we don't clean our teeth, the results are unpleasant for us and other people. But in heaven, I don't think we shall have to do our teeth each day. They will always sparkle in the resurrection body. So there are some things that we have to keep doing, like the washing up. But there are other things where, other levels where change is not futile, but full of meaning. Once I was explaining Gregory's view of infinite progress in terms that I thought were rather eloquent, and afterwards an elderly lady came up to me and said, "I found your remarks deeply depressing." "Oh," I said, "why?" "I've had a very hard life," she replied. "Hard work. I did hope that in heaven I was going to have a good rest." Now, her feeling about the hardness of life and the need for a rest, that applies on the level of futile, repetitive change. But if we move to the further level of creative change, then we can progress endlessly without ever growing weary. That's one of the differences, I hope, between heaven and present life. Samuel Butler said, "Life is just one long process of growing tired." Well, in heaven, life is one long progress of moving ever forward, and instead of growing tired, growing ever more lively, more youthful, more full of energy. So the downward trend is reversed in the heavenly kingdom. So that is Gregory's vision of the future hope. In St. Paul's terms, we are transformed from glory to glory. That is indeed one of Gregory's favorite texts. We grow from glory to glory, from one glory to another glory, and then onto a glory which is greater still, and so ad infinitum. For Gregory, each end point is a new starting point. Each arrival is a new departure. The divine beauty is constantly rediscovered. There is an unceasing recreation of the human person. We are constantly being created, Gregory says. So creation is continuous, and it goes on being continuous even in the age to come. To describe this infinite progress, Gregory uses a phrase that he takes from Paul's epistle to the Philippians 3:13 to 14. There Paul says, forgetting the things that are in the past, I reach forward to what lies ahead. And in Greek, the word for reach forward is epektino. And from this we can form the abstract noun epektasis, reaching forward. This notion of epektasis is central to Gregory. Even in the age to come, we keep reaching forward into what lies ahead. Before we leave Gregory, We've spoken of the 4 stages: the vision of light in the burning bush, mingled light and darkness in the cloud, darkness on Mount Sinai, and the vision of the back of God. Before we leave all of this, let us take note of what is a unifying theme running through all Gregory's writings. And this is the idea of love. As a mystical theologian, Gregory is very definitely a theologian not only of divine darkness, but of divine love. And for love, Gregory does not simply use the New Testament term agape, but he also uses the term eros, which is a term used more in Greek Platonism. Some modern writers have made a contrast between eros, which means human love, erotic love, or on a higher level, our desire for God, and agape, which means the love of God poured out and descending towards us. This kind of contrast between eros and agape has no basis in a Greek father such as St. Gregory of Nyssa. For Gregory of Nyssa, eros means love, agape, in its most vivid and intense form. He deliberately uses the word eros, which describes physical sexual love, also as a word to describe divine love, our longing for God. And this theme of eros or agape, love, God's love for us, our responsive love for him, this is the deepest inspiration of Gregory's mystical theology. If we speak about stripping away all images, entering into the darkness of unknowing, this could suggest a rather negative approach to the Christian life, an entry into a kind of emptiness. But this is not at all true of Gregory's teaching. What transforms the image of darkness from a seemingly negative image of an absence into a supremely positive image of presence is precisely the element of love. When we have left aside all sensory images, all intellectual concepts, when we enter into the darkness of unknowing, what remains? Gregory's answer is, love remains. So the divine darkness for Gregory, the dazzling and luminous darkness, this signifies union with God in love. As Gregory puts it, knowledge is turned into love. Our knowledge is stripped away. We enter into unknowing. But what remains in the unknowing, in the darkness, in the experience of mystery? Love remains. Thank you.